Well, I hope you all enjoyed Duck Soup. You certainly got your dose of silly for a while with this movie that was made in 1933, starring the Marx Brothers, led by, of course, the great Groucho Marx. Now, as you gathered, the Marx Brothers dealt in just slapstick tomfoolery at its best. And it is a movie like King Kong that was made at the height of the Depression. And it, as I said when I introduced the film, was a movie that discussed things that people were really not that comfortable laughing at in 1933. You think about who has become Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Hitler. Mussolini is the dictator of Italy. Stalin is the dictator of the Soviet Union. By 1933, the Japanese had already invaded Manchuria, China. And storm clouds were, of course, gathering for what will ultimately become World War II. And people knew it. Couple all those things that I just mentioned with the fact that we're at the height of the Great Depression in our country with a 25% unemployment rate. And this film is going to make fun of a lot of things that people just really can't laugh at. Duck Soup is like a Bordeaux. It is like a bottle of wine, a fine bottle of wine, which is a Bordeaux, is a wine that you really don't want to drink right away. You want to lay it down and let it age 15, 20 years, maybe longer, before you drink it. And it becomes much better over time. Well, Duck Soup is a great movie. And a lot of people thought so in 1933, but a lot more thought so in the late 60s and early 70s when it was rediscovered by college students. And we're going to be talking about why. So Duck Soup is one of our Bordeaux's in film studies. It's a film that was just received so-so whenever it was released, but is going to be reappraised, reevaluated, and lauded as one of the great movies that's ever been made when it's rediscovered in the late 60s. So the Marx Brothers' greatest and funniest masterpiece, the classic comedy Duck Soup, was a 1933 short but brilliant satire and lampooning of blundering dictatorial leaders, fascism, and authoritarian government. The film, produced by the great Herman Mankiewicz, was prepared during the crisis of the Great Depression. First released theatrically by Paramount in November of 1933, it starred who were then billed as the four Marx Brothers, Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo, and also featured Margaret Dumont, Raquel Torres, Louis Calhern, and Edward Kennedy. Some of its clever gags and routines were taken from Groucho and Chico's early 1930s radio show called Flywheel. Working titles for the film included Ooh La La, Firecrackers, Grasshoppers, and Cracked Ice. Groucho was actually once asked what Duck Soup meant, and he shrugged his shoulders and said, "I have no idea. It sounded like a good idea at the time," which is just something so Groucho Marx to say. So here we have the Marx Brothers. Harpo was, of course, the mute that used musical instruments and other things to make noises. There's Groucho, second from the left with the mustache. He was the leader of the Marx Brothers and was often mocked and parodied by Bugs Bunny, of course, in the old Warner Brothers cartoons. He's actually Bill Murray's hero. Zeppo Marx was not in the movie much. He was the secretary, if you'll remember, and this would actually be his last film with his three other brothers here. There was another brother called Gummo, and Gummo was in management, like representing kind of like an agent to a lot of stars. Zeppo will get into that as well. This will be his last movie alongside the three other Marx Brothers. And Chico plays, of course, Ciccolini in Duck Soup, which is, of course, a play on Mussolini. And there's Groucho, just absolutely hilarious, and always Mr. Innuendo. An innuendo is which is what he was famous for, is an expression that, or a double entendre, innuendo and double entendre. Double entendre is an expression that can have more than one meaning, and the other meaning can be interpreted perhaps suggestively or sexually. So Groucho Marx was the master of the double entendre. And here we have some of those delightful lobby cards that were so famous and are a work of art in their own right. And I love this. Now, while the Marx Brothers were at Paramount, as you guys might have guessed, their work was a lot more edgy. We said that Paramount was the studio that was not afraid to push the boundaries, and often used stars like Mae West and sexual innuendo to sell their movies. And the Marx Brothers, while they were at Paramount, were certainly a lot edgier and more apt to be controversial than they would be when they would go to MGM. But when they did get to MGM, they would simply become known as the Marx Brothers, or the three Marx Brothers. The outrageous film Duck Soup was both a critical and commercial failure at the time of its release. Audiences were taken aback by such preposterous political disrespect, buffoonery, and cynicism at a time of political and economic crisis, with Franklin Roosevelt's struggle against the Depression in the United States amidst the rising power of Hitler in Germany. And, of course, there's a quote in the movie toward the end of it. And remember, while you're out there risking life and limb through shot and shell, we'll be in here thinking what a sucker you are. That's what Groucho says. That was very insulting to a lot of people who supported the Army and supported the Navy. He's suggesting that people who go to war are, quote, suckers. And that was very offensive to a lot of people. Insulted by the film, fascist Italian dictator Mussolini banned the film in his country because, again, Ciccolini is supposed to be Mussolini. So, and of course, Hitler banned the film. The Marx Brothers were not allowed to be shown in Germany because, of course, they were Jewish. So Marx Brothers films were not allowed to be shown under Hitler in Germany. Fortunately, the film was rediscovered by a generation of 1960s college students and by revival film festivals and museum showings. As a result, the film has attained immortal status. This was the last of the Marx Brothers films to feature all four of the brothers. Their next film, without Zeppo for MGM and its producer, the great Irving Thalberg, Hollywood's most prestigious studio, was their landmark movie, A Night at the Opera, which of course had a more developed and polished plotline. So as I told you, when they would make the transition to MGM, Irving Thalberg would sort of clean and polish them up and make them more family-friendly, middle-class values type act that was so defining of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And you guys, that last comment that I told you about, war being meaningless, you can think about what was going on in the late 60s and early 70s in America, which was, of course, the Vietnam War, where you had a lot of anti-war protesters. And a message like that would have resonated with a lot of college students. The irrepressible comedians in this quintessential, archaic, satirical film simply but irreverently attack the pomposity of small-time governmental leaders, Firefly as the president, the absurdity of government itself, like the cabinet meeting scene, governmental diplomacy, like the Trentino Firefly scene, an arbitrary legal system, like Ciccolini's trial, and war fought over petty matters, like the mobilization and war scenes. The non-stop, frenetic film is filled with a number of delightfully hilarious moments, gags, fast-moving acts, double entendres, Groucho, comedy routines, puns, pure silliness, zany improv, quips, and insult-spewed lines of dialogue. Much of the comedy does make the obvious statement that war is indeed nonsensical and meaninglessly destructive, especially since the word upstart was the insult word that led to war between the two countries. It also contains a few of their more famous sequences, that wonderful lemonade cellar confrontation, and of course the Mayor pantomime sequence, both of which are just on point. The fact that the United States Library of Congress has declared Duck Soup to be culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant is one indication of the film's influence. It also is included in the original 1998 broadcast of AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 85. A decade later, for the 2007 update of the list, Duck Soup would rank even higher, coming in at number 60. So this is considered one of the great movies that's ever been made by the American Film Institute. Now, when the Marx Brothers went to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, there was a legendary story about how they came to go to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. They were actually playing bridge one evening with Irving Thalberg, and he suggested that they leave Paramount and come to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and they agreed. And when they went to go and meet Irving Thalberg, he kept them waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So finally, Groucho had the idea that they should get baked potatoes. Irving Thalberg, the great producer, had a big roaring fireplace in his office at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. So the Marx Brothers got baked potatoes and took all their clothes off. And whenever Irving Thalberg finally came into the room, he found the Marx Brothers roasting baked potatoes over a fire in the nude. And Irving Thalberg just thought that was hilarious because people were so afraid of him because of all the power he had at MGM. People didn't play jokes on Irving Thalberg. So he thought that was just hilarious. But when they left Paramount, Zeppo left the act to become an agent and went on to build with his brother Gummo one of the biggest talent agencies in Hollywood, getting the likes of Jack Benny and Lana Turner their big starts. Groucho and Chico did radio, and there was talk of returning to Broadway. And I mentioned at a bridge game with Chico, Thalberg began discussing the possibilities of the Marxes coming to MGM, and they signed on, now simply known as the Three Marx Brothers, or just the straight-up Marx Brothers. Unlike the free-for-all scripts at Paramount, Thalberg insisted on a strong story structure, making them into more sympathetic characters, interweaving their comedy with romantic plots and non-comic musical numbers, while targets of their mischief were largely confined to clear villains. Thalberg was adamant that these scripts at MGM include a low point where all seems lost for both the Marxes and their romantic leads. In a June 13, 1969 interview with the great Dick Cavett, Groucho Marx said that the two movies that the Marx Brothers made with Irving Thalberg at MGM, A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races, were the very best they ever produced. Another idea of Irving Thalberg's was that before filming would commence on an upcoming picture, the Marx Brothers might try out their material on the vaudeville stage in front of a live audience, working on comic timing and learning what did earn and didn't earn a laugh. So I hope you enjoyed the film you just saw, Duck Soup. It is tomfoolery at its finest, but I don't know. There's just something very stress-relieving about the movie and very, very funny. And even though it wasn't a big commercial success at the time, it would be recognized in the late 60s and early 70s and, of course, now as one of the great movies that's ever been made. And, of course, the Marxes were so influential on so many comedy teams and comedians in the future. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll talk to you soon.